Welcome to the Catalyst of Change, Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Science. This seminar is in English with interpretation available in Spanish and French. Kindly select the language of your preference in the Zoom bar menu. This seminar is being recorded and made available on the CIMIT YouTube channel. You are invited to submit questions via Slido for our distinguished speaker of today to be addressed in the open Q&A session right after the conversation. We are hearing today from Dr. Purnima Menon, who is the Director of Strategy and Partnership of the International Food Policy Research Institute, and she will have a conversation with Dr. Walter Chibasa, who is a Principal Scientist and Seed Systems Lead for Africa in the Global Maize Program at CIMIT based in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Brian Govers, Director General of CIMIT, to officially open the event and introduce our distinguished speaker of today. Dr. Govers, over to you.
Thank you, Isabel. And once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to all colleagues joining us from around the world, and welcome to yet a new edition of Catalyst of Change. Today's conversation brings together two outstanding leaders whose work is helping shape the future of food systems, nutrition, agricultural transformation at a global scale. I want to welcome first and foremost Dr. Purnima Menon, Director of Strategy and Partnerships at IFPRI, our sister center and dear colleague. Throughout her career, Purnima has helped redefine how the world understands the link between nutrition, agriculture, health systems, gender, technology, and food systems. Her work has contributed to some of the most influential global collaborations and reports in the field, actually including the Lancet series on nutrition, the Global Nutrition Report, and the Countdown to 2030. Beyond research, she has also championed new models of leadership through initiatives such as the Next Generation Leadership Collective, and she helps nurture a new generation committed to building a better nourished and a more equitable world. And what you may not know about Purnima, but I do, is that she likes to take pictures of food, and she may explain a little bit more about that in her intervention. Joining her in the conversation is Walter Chibasa, Principal Scientist and Seed Systems Lead for Africa at CIMIT. He's based in Nairobi. Walter leads strategic efforts to strengthen maize seed systems across Africa, helping scale improved maize varieties that support food security, resilience, and agricultural transformation across the continent. Together, they will explore some of the most pressing questions facing global food systems today: how we create pathways towards better nutrition, stronger resilience, inclusive innovation, and sustainable transformation in a rapidly changing world. Today is also a special moment for Catalyst of Change, as this conversation marks the closing chapter of the current series format. Over the past edition, this platform has connected us with remarkable voices and important ideas from across science, policy, innovation, and development. So stay tuned, because transformation also means evolving. In the coming months, Catalyst of Change will return in a renewed format designed to reach a broader audience, amplify more diverse perspectives, and create greater visibility for women, youth, and inclusion across the global conversations that we are championing to shape the future of food systems and science. We are excited of what comes next, and we are grateful that this closure is done by two outstanding catalysts of change. There is no better leader I can present to you than Purnima, and I'm sure, Walter, you will give very different vision and views. And please challenge us, challenge Purnima, let's challenge the world. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Pram, for such a wonderful introduction. I really, I hope I can live up to that. Let me just, firstly just say thank you. Sometimes you want to be the inaugural, but sometimes it's also exciting to be the last in a series, because maybe we get to think together about the future of the series, and maybe even the next series is something we do jointly. So, I'm just going to say thank you. Incredibly grateful for this opportunity to reflect and put some things together. As many of you know, I'm known to pack things into life and pack things into my talks, and so you'll certainly get some of that here. If somebody could confirm that they can see my slides, that would be great.
Yes, we can see your slide.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Again, just wanted to say a huge thank you. I'll try to speak for maybe about 15 minutes or so and cover a range of different things. I'm too much of a researcher to not share a little bit about my research as well. And, we'll share some links and other things later if you're interested in following up later. I do want to acknowledge, several of the people who've especially supported the research as we've unfolded on this. And, because absolutely everything we do is in team and is in community at IFPRI. I want to thank my many research and communications colleagues, as well as my various partners, critics, friends, and family. I'll come to that a little bit at the end. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. Let me first just start with the journey, with where this journey started. I started reading recipe books for entertainment, or books about food for entertainment, maybe when I was about 8 years old. And as I progressed through high school, and I really enjoyed science, and so studied all the sciences, math, and everything. But was really interested in ending in the hospitality industry. I still haven't reached there yet. And so in conversation with a cousin who was in the hospitality industry, I ended up choosing to study nutrition instead of, as many Indians do. I studied in India in my childhood, choosing medicine and engineering, but I chose nutrition because it was a pathway to hotel school, but I still haven't reached there. And while studying nutrition, I also got to study French, and I really liked it. And I thought I might actually then pursue a future in language. I ended up taking sort of a bit of a medical gap year right after my bachelor's. And I applied to master's programs both in French and in nutrition. I bombed my French orals, so I ended up focusing on nutrition. I didn't have a choice to make. I had some opportunities to work on nutrition evidence translation with Dr. C. Gopalan, who those of you who are from India may know that he was the father of nutrition, established the National Nutrition Institute in India. And I had, he was in his retirement running a foundation, and I had the opportunity to work with him on evidence translation. And I tell myself, and I find myself still doing many of those same things. I did take another gap year. Ended up in Washington with my parents, did an internship at IFPRI then in December 1995, so almost 30 years ago. And that was truly transformational for my journey after. It led me to work on a PhD. It connected me with people like Lawrence Haddad and Marie Ruel, who have been lifelong mentors. And it created opportunities for me to also work with IFPRI even after I finished my PhD in Haiti. I continued on, always had a link with IFPRI even when I worked at Cornell, and then finally moved to take on a real job at IFPRI about 10 years after I first encountered the Institute to kick off our nutrition work in South Asia, primarily in India, because IFPRI had just opened an office there, and the Prime Minister was very keen for us to do some work on tackling India's malnutrition challenge. So that's how I sort of really got into the research to policy space. I'll speak a little bit about that later. And I spent nearly 15 years doing that until, I enter, but I'm just going to call a phase of experiments in leadership, both at IFPRI and in the CGIAR, and is how I have gotten to know, many colleagues at CIMMYT. It's how I've gotten to know Bram, Sarah, many others in your ecosystem. I worked a lot with Tim Krupnick in the past and still do as part of the CG ecosystem. But these are really experiments in leadership. My own research path has been, going from sort of doing very deep work in Bangladesh during my PhD process, understanding women's lives, the roles of education, and the intersections of education and nutrition, going from there to building an implementation research portfolio that was, again, very sort of woman and person-centered, but now looking at program ecosystems in Haiti, going from there to scaling up implementation research in a very large and multi-year, 15-year research portfolio in a program called Alive and Thrive that focused on behavior change, simultaneously working on supporting this nutrition evidence to policy ecosystem in India, and now to sort of leading and anchoring work on different parts sort of at a portfolio level. At IFPRI, I never forget my early days because I think they ground you and train you to think and see things in ways that are increasingly harder as you move into more complex roles. So, I lean on some of those early years quite a lot, even today, in what they've taught me, but also what I care about. So my first explorations, in really understanding how people make decisions about how to feed their babies, this wasn't focused on how they fed themselves, was through exploring infant and young child feeding practices and decisions in depth. So that's a photograph of me from 2000 in Bangladesh. I spent a lot of time with the young women that you see in the bottom of the picture, understanding their lives as mothers and trying to understand what made things different if you're an educated versus a not very well-educated mother. It trained me very well for next parts of the work that I did in Haiti and beyond, because it really emphasized sort of this multi-dimensional aspect of decision-making around foods within households, and how if you had to think about reshaping consumer behaviors, you have to really think about how you target many different individuals in household, particularly those with power, such as older women and fathers. I was able to take, in the context of having finished my PhD work, moving on to some work between IFPRI and Cornell in Haiti, those insights on understanding communities and people's sort of lived experiences around food, to designing and evaluating a really consequential for the field of nutrition set of interventions where we proved for the first time that targeting the first 1,000 days was possible using a combination of interventions. It was done in the context of USAID's maternal and child nutrition food-assisted programs, and that it was possible to design and deliver meaningful and impactful behavior change programs within this. We did lots of work in the communities designing the behavior change, but also put everything to test in some very rigorous multi-year randomized controlled trial methods. And that then led me to being able to anchor and lead actually the evaluation portfolio for probably one of the world's largest social and behavior change communication efforts to improve infant and young child feeding at scale. This was an initially first phase $80 million program of work supported by the Gates Foundation, with nearly 10% of that, maybe even a little bit more, being deployed to the research, because they felt so strongly that demonstrating the impact at scale was going to be really important to sustain and scale the behavior change effort. So in that work in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Ethiopia, in the first phase of work, and then subsequently in India and Burkina Faso over the next phase of the work, we really studied this multidimensional effort of advocacy to shape policy and enabling environments, interpersonal communication, mass media, and data to drive improvements in the health systems and other systems that were delivering this at scale. Really published some top-notch research, but more importantly, were able to provide the evidence base that then allowed not just Alive and Thrive, but many of their partners, including BRAC in Bangladesh, governments in different countries, to really take on and scale these evidence-based proven behavior change strategies And we were doing the research when it was operating at scale. So we also learned a lot, not just about scaling, but about what it means to do research when the program is already mandated to go to scale from zero. So what we've learned a lot about in terms of nudging people towards healthy diets, I'll come to policy in a minute, and then about myself, is being very specific about the change that we're targeting, going well beyond information. I think many of you are trying to, also scale information and other technologies to farmers. I think many of these things related to behavior change relate to the work of farmer adoption as well. We have to be specific, we have to go beyond information, we have to understand, all the people that play a role in making things happen. We have to understand and deploy all possible platforms for scale and quality. We really have to think hard about financing, and we need to think about enabling environments both within and outside of the food system. I mean, just for nutrition, as an example, labor and leave laws, labeling laws, import tariffs, advertising, conflicts of interest, all of these things become really, really important when you think about what takes the agenda forward for nutrition. And I think the same is true for many of the other things we're trying to understand adoption patterns for. My entry into work in sort of full-scale food systems actually came rather late in my tenure at IFPRI and in the CGIAR. A lot of the work I mentioned earlier focused very much on health systems and community-based platforms and systems. I had the tremendous opportunity to work with colleagues from CIMMYT and others on the regional integrated initiatives of the CG on transforming food systems. And one of the first things we realized when a group of us got together from across the CG was each of us was seeing this in very different ways, and that to make progress, we needed to see it together. And so across our many different work packages, we designed an assessment that allowed us to see the entire food system and have conversations about it that were very meaningful and very different. Some of us started with the plate, others started with the farm, yet others were sitting and looking at markets. And so for me, I think the most sort of transformational piece in this was that work we did on understanding what was going on the ground, and really showed that, it was a very limited number of foods at the end of the day that were entering all of the different meals that people would eat. But more importantly, that a majority of what people ate across all the 5 districts we did this in was coming from the market. It was really only rice and wheat, and then a few other commodities that, where people mentioned that they were relying on their own production. And so it also exemplified, in a sense, how complex the food system is in terms of how it brings things to people's plate. And, I think I carry that very, very strongly even today as we think about some of the impacts that we want to have in the CG, right, in terms of reshaping what happens on people's plates. Now, I want to pivot a bit just to the public policy side of things. What I've learned over the many years, I have some training in my postdoc time from Cornell as well on understanding policy processes and political environments and how evidence meets policy. So this really comes from there. I think about what we are trying to do all the time. We're trying to get people to recognize that we have a set of development challenges. We need to then get them to align on why those challenges exist and where our solutions fit around those challenges and those drivers. And then we need to get people to act, to invest, to finance solutions. And we need to collectively learn because, as researchers, this is our contribution to the world, providing evidence that sort of cuts across that continuum. Our biggest challenge is that this is like a game of snakes and ladders over time, because the evolution of science and evidence, of policy, finance, politics, society, and culture are just always moving. And a development challenge may get salience today, may not be salient tomorrow. A solution set may get salience today, may not be salient tomorrow, just given how things move. And our job as researchers is to sort of, stay with that, stick with it, and just stay together with that ecosystem. And, we are often very, very tuned to working on small solutions as researchers, but it's very important we sort of step back and take a look at this entire ecosystem of going from problems to delivering solutions at scale and find ourselves in that piece and sort of, stay there and think about how we engage, right? This is our job, I think, as scientists, but also as science leaders. And from my decades of evidence now, of work now, especially back in South Asia on evidence to policies, that all of this change is nudged forward by people in communities. So no policymaker will ever act alone without an entire community of people around them. And we have methods and tools in our work to understand those policy communities. This is an example actually of a policy community map from Orissa in India. And you're really able to understand when you do these kinds of things that how important it is to sort of nurture the communities that create change, and that we can do so with intentionality so that it really helps to support evidence and data use instead of sort of battling with systems, right? So we have methods and tools in the kind of work we do to get to this. But it's really important we situate ourselves in this. And I think about that a lot. Who am I in this dot on the map? And how do I build the connections, the networks? How do I create leadership that actually leads to change? Now, I want to sort of go to the third part and close out my talk, which is, why do we do what we do, right? I made a field visit very recently to communities in Madhya Pradesh after a very long time. Sadly, the work of leadership keeps you more in meeting rooms than, out in communities. But it was a great opportunity to remind me of remaining people-centered and understanding people's whole lives, and how those whole lives engage with, the food system, with society itself, with, the healthcare systems that actually, end up being very central to people's lives, especially in rural areas. As Bram said, I really like taking photos of food, but in recent times, I've been taking a lot more photos of, things like the stuff you see on the left, which is, ultra-processed foods. They're reshaping our food system in really damaging ways for people, for the environment, and for communities. And it's really important we think about, when you work on commodities, when you work on certain parts of the food system, where does that end up? And does that end up being, who does it end up being good for? So, I have a whole collection of photos on this because I'm thinking about this quite a lot. And doing that, in a sense, helps us think about power. So I think about power a lot as well, right? On the one hand, what we hold, power, responsibility, the role of institutions, of financing. And the second is, how do you then deploy that to improve the daily lives of women and mothers? And I really come in on women and mothers because they carry the burden, unfortunately, still of feeding the world. And what you're seeing today is really a clash between those who hold a lot of power in the food space and, those who don't hold a lot of power, either in their communities or in their families, and very rarely in the food space. And I think about our job in terms of power and responsibility as, being in that sort of intersection and thinking every day, what is it that we can do with our research to help unblock these different things. I also have thought a lot about power and leadership. As Bram mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of the Next Generation Leadership Initiative, which was founded really by Corinna Hawkes, who's now at the FAO and leads systems work over there, and Shu Wen Ng, who's at Duke University. The two of them, brought some of us together. We just ended up in a set of random conversations once a month or so during COVID, and then co-created this initiative from there. We felt like there's a lot of attention in the world of leadership on who leads. One of the things we wanted to do in Next Generation is also lean in a little bit on how we lead. And I'm happy to share links. We have a leadership manifesto that lays out a set of 8 courageous leadership practices that do not need to be restricted to women at all. They're grounded in our understanding and our collective thinking on how women lead, which is a little bit different sometimes. But we think that it's a very transferable set of leadership practices. And so, I will invite you all to, look at the website, join the forums, engage with the groups. I don't, engage. I'm more of a strategic advisor to the initiative now, but really thinking about transforming leadership, both in terms of who, but also in terms of how, has become really important to me over the last many years. I thought it would be fun to share with you some things that I do that are, not quite work related, but remind me of work every once in a while. I do enjoy birding a lot. That's my husband and myself on a trip some years ago. I enjoy contemporary art very, very much. I'm always trying to find a moment to visit a museum or go to a biennale or something. This is a photograph from the Kochi Biennale, which happens every 2 years, of an artist who did a piece that also had food. So these are like depictions of food, food plates. I certainly love to eat. This is one of my favorite things to eat. It's a fish curry, and I really enjoy listening to live music. So, I think I can move into retirement and next stages of life very seamlessly with all of these interests and passions. I really, as I close, I just want to make a couple of remarks about improving lives. I mean, in all the work that I've done from 2000 to the photos that I showed you, and from 2026, the women that I've met in Haiti and in Bangladesh, I'm really reminded that we are in such a state of privilege in the institutions that we sit in. And using our research to improve lives is such an important mission. I think we have the opportunity to use our research to tell the stories of people whose stories are not as often told, because our data captures the lives of the poor. It captures the impact of solutions to improve their lives. The ways in which we engage bring that evidence and those stories to policymakers and funders to help them shape those decisions. And, really on a daily basis, I'm reminded of, how powerful a mission that is. And I, invite us all to really think about that power and how we wield it. It can be really, sort of, it holds us in good stead when things get very difficult in funding and other such things. I want to close, and so we can move on to the conversation, by really acknowledging a wide range of influencers and supporters. And in my world, these have been both male allies and female leaders, people who have championed my work, who've supported me, who've showed me how things are done, but also people from whom I've learned what I don't want to be as a leader. But I especially want to acknowledge some male allies, and I invite again all the men in the audience to really think about what is it that you can do to shepherd the journey of a young woman who went to study nutrition in India on a pathway to hotel school to move to a position of institutional leadership. So for me, these were Dr. C. Gopalan, my PhD mentor, Jean-Pierre Habicht, Lawrence Haddad, and at IFPRI more recently, Johan Josvin and Channing Arndt have been tremendous male allies. I also have had a really wonderful opportunity to be mentored by and supported by female leaders. I especially want to acknowledge Kathleen Rasmussen at Cornell, who sent me in 2007 to my first ever leadership training course that allowed me to see certain things about myself that I still think about. And at IFPRI, Marie Ruel, Agnes Kisumbing have just been tremendous, tremendous mentors over the years. Marie was my boss for 20 years. She changed how the CG works on nutrition. So, please look her up sometime if you don't already know her. And then outside of my, immediate institutional ecosystem, I've met some really strong and amazing women leaders in policy, in research, on the donor side, who've, given me sort of insights into how to lead as a woman. So yeah, thank you. I just, these are photographs of many of these people. I've learned a lot also from the young people around me. I've mentored many research analysts who've moved on to do PhDs, who are in different places today, and many of them are in these photographs. And even today, I learn a lot from them. I have many people with whom I have once a year conversations that often they initiate, but I find that I get more value from as I watch their journeys and see them rise as leaders. So again, apologies for being a little long, but thank you so much for this opportunity, Bram, and your team. I hope it gives you some insights into my journey, into my work, and into who I am as a person. And I look forward to the questions and answers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Purnima, for this great presentation. Now we invite Walter Chibasa to have a conversation with you. Walter, over to you.
Okay. Good morning and afternoon again. Thank you very much, Dr. Memon, for your insightful and inspiring presentation. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to continue the conversation with you. I have a few questions I would like to ask, particularly around leadership, equity, and inclusion in science and development. Your career has bridged nutrition science, agri-food system, health systems, gender, and policy translation. What have you learned about the importance of interdisciplinary leadership in creating more equitable scientific institutions and development systems?
So for, I think the main thing for me is just respect for each other's disciplinary strengths and training. And that's often quite hard. Economists see the world differently from, say, nutritionists and epidemiologists. Agronomists see the world differently from sometimes from nutritionists. And but what I like about the work that we do, and I really picked this up in the TAFSA experience that I mentioned, where we all tried to see the food system together. That was a great opportunity for us to really see not just the framing, but also the methods we got, the ways in which we looked at data. And the only way to do it, I think, is to jump in, to work with people who are very different from you, but to keep that learning and curiosity mindset at all times. And the other thing I really believe in terms of creating great interdisciplinary teams is that you have to eat together very early in your journeys. Because when people come together and have some fun, share a meal, they learn things about each other that are very hard to do when you're on Zoom calls and other such things, right? You really understand how people see the world and have a great chance to build both community and that relationship building also helps with professional respect. So, I think that for me is key. And then, for younger researchers, I think really looking for collaboration opportunities, reading in other disciplines as well, and reading books about food and food systems that come from different perspectives. I'm actually almost done with finishing a very recent book called How the World Eats by Julian Baggini, and I highly recommend it to people because it allows you to kind of see this multidisciplinarity. So yeah, those are just for me a few ingredients.
Thank you very much. And you have worked extensively across research policy and global collaborations. In your experience, what are the biggest structural barriers preventing underrepresented voices, particularly women and researchers from the global south, from influencing global scientific agendas?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, be. I think this is a big challenge. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is a very big challenge. It's a challenge that comes up on a daily basis in many different ways within our organizations, outside our organizations, in the broader science ecosystem, right? So I think that there are some real challenges there. And at the heart of it, I would just say that relates to how science is funded and financed more than anything else. Because money is power in the world, and money is also power in the world of research. And so, to the extent that research funding flows to institutions and entities in the global north that need to sustain themselves, including ourselves, including the CG, that is money that then doesn't flow the same way to institutions in the global south. And there is a reality there. I think even in our own ecosystem, we all believe in the power of the CG, but every single CGIAR institution is in effect a global north institution. Just our setup is as an international organization, right? And so I do think that we need to think really hard about how resources flow for research, and how that affects what happens in terms of who has a seat at the table in different ways. But we all also hold power and responsibility, right? So if money flows to my institution or to your institution or into our science programs, we have opportunities to think about how do we, either use that to bring in our partners or to bring in and create space for people within our own ecosystems. But we have to grow the pie. I think we really have to grow the pie for resources and to use our ability as international organizations to grow that pie, to build the partnerships, to create the opportunities. Investing in the future generation is really, really important. I mean, I wouldn't be here if people hadn't invested in me 30 years ago. So we have to take very long-range timeframes, right? Who is being trained where in PhD programs today? How do we create space for those people? How do we, begin to create more diverse pipelines of researchers, starting now and carry a very sort of long horizon to it? And all of us can do that. Every single one of us, I think, holds some power in our ecosystems and holds a great deal of responsibility. So, so I think I'm alternately pessimistic and optimistic about how we do this reshaping. But, what you're doing, the conversations we're having, the ways in which we, look at how we deploy our own resources is going to be very important as we look forward.
Thank you very much. Many organizations talk about diversity, but fewer achieve genuine inclusion. What distinguishes performative inclusion from truly equitable leadership cultures in science and development institutions?
Tough questions. We need to do both, okay? So I think the performative is key because it puts the data in front of our eyes. The global health 50/50 initiative, the global, IFPRI subjected ourselves to that rating, for example. So we now know sort of how we look on the metrics and the performative side of things. But a lot of what happens on leadership is also culture, within institutions and across institutions. So I think we really need to do, both the culture shaping side of leadership and creating spaces for equity and inclusion, as well as the other. So, we need to be measuring, what is the strength and for the demographics that we think are important right now, where are we at in terms of, leadership, in terms of mid-level researchers, early career researchers, what does that actually look like? Who's being trained? Who's being brought in where into the ecosystem? And then really think about what's the change that we want and how do we create that? Now, the culture part is actually harder to do, right? Because the rest you can sort of start to think about through either recruitment or, resource deployment or what have you. But the culture part is where the clashes will invariably come through. And institutions, I think, need to do both internal work and external work on that. But we start with ourselves, right? I mean, IFPRI has just launched a new strategy that centers 3 pillars: our thematic work, our geographic presence, and the types of work that we do, our approaches. And the culture work that we do on the inside of the institution in sort of marrying and bringing all 3 things together is going to be very important, because matching and marrying thematic and geographic, that raises precisely these issues of inclusion, who gets on what proposals, how do we work with funders, how do we put funding opportunities in front of different researchers. And we're working through that. We're working through that right now. It's a big part of my role. And we know it's going to create, internal things that we have to deal with. But we are not brave institutions if we don't take those things on, right? To advance what we know is an important agenda on equity and inclusion in science.
Okay, thank you very much. And briefly, you have helped shape influential initiatives such as the Lancet series on nutrition, the Global Nutrition Report, and others. How can large global collaborations ensure that local realities, indigenous knowledge, and community perspectives are not overshadowed by dominant institutions or narratives?
Again, very important question. Again, I think each of us has a responsibility there, right? So I had the privilege of being invited to work on some of these series and sort of global reports and other such things. Because in a sense, I carried two things. One is, I think as a researcher, research excellence is non-negotiable, right? So every researcher has and carries that as their sort of primary calling card. But many of us also have other calling cards, right? The locations we work in, our cultural origins, our policy experiences. And I think when we have the opportunities to either engage in or be part of or lead some of these global efforts, they are presented to us as opportunities. What we do with it to create more inclusion is up to us, right? So, or to create the sort of content that brings in lived experiences and other such things. So, when I'm invited in and work on many of these reports and sort of commissions and what have you, I'm always carrying both hats, right? I'm carrying my research excellence hat, which is the core of who I am as a professional, but increasingly also recognizing that sometimes that's not going to be enough, and that my job, my space in that room is also to carry the other parts of my lived experience and my institutional experience. And again, I think if each of us carries and acknowledges those both of those in a sense, or all of those things as we are in these rooms and in these spaces, I think it makes our work better, and it creates opportunities for other people. Once you're in a place, you're often asked, who else can I bring in here? We can use that as opportunities both to bring in research excellence and to bring in inclusion, right? It's not enough to do inclusion without excellence. To me, both have to go hand in hand. That's what delivers impact. So yeah, I go back to issues of power, responsibility, and how we use our space at all moments.
Okay. As someone who has lived and worked across cultures and geographies, how has your own personal journey shaped your understanding of inclusive leadership and belonging in international scientific spaces?
Yeah. So listen, again, I think all of us carry different parts of ourselves into different spaces. I have a bit of I'm very comfortable in Western culture. I've grown up, spent a lot of time in the US. I understand the scientific culture and discipline here, understand Western institutions or global North institutions, and sort of the cultural ways of being in those places. But I also have spent a lot of time, of course, in my country of birth and my country of region of my dominant work. And we are often bridge builders. There are many people who carry sort of different cultural experiences who can be bridge builders. And when you can do that well, I think you can create more space for other people as well. So, I think I always look at, how do we sort of build more people's abilities, more capabilities in all of us as individuals to be bridge builders, have enough experiences and opportunities in different parts of what makes up institutional cultures in different parts of the world. And again, I think the CG really has a tremendous opportunity because we offer people precisely that, really a cultural and diversity, a sort of multi-dimensional way of looking at the world. And so I think we have a real ability here to make change. Very different from if you're just a global North university, by the way. If you're just a global North university, it's very different to say, okay, this is, this is the change I want to see. But being in the CG, I think we bridge so much that it's a tremendous opportunity for us.
Okay. Okay, thank you. As a founding member of the Next Generation Leadership collectively, what leadership qualities do you believe are most urgently needed in the next generation of scientists and change makers committed to equity, and inclusion?
So two things. So we have 8 leadership practices that we sort of outline in the Next Generation Collaborative, and we label them courageous leadership because they really require people to go, to think a little bit beyond themselves. And I think the 2 that I'm going to pick up over there of the 8 that we laid out are, one is about the power of collaboration and collective work, which requires us to really stretch ourselves in ways that, are very different from working within our disciplines. And the second is on lifting people up. People don't do this enough. We don't lift other people up enough. And these two things, sort of interdisciplinary and sort of a collaboration mindset and a mindset of lifting other people up, which can be hard in many moments, especially in a resource-constrained way. I think these are 2 things that will require us to think really differently as leaders, putting ourselves out of business as individuals, for example, moving to a different place by creating space for other people. And they're not easy. They're not easy for me. They're not easy for our institutions. They're not easy within. They're not easy outside. And so I think that's what I see as big challenge areas for us to keep working on. How do we create the incentives and the opportunities for people to collaborate, build things that are bigger than themselves, and also to lift other people up, because lifting other people up requires you to cede space. It requires you to step back, which is also very hard in leadership, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think your response leads me to my next question on early career researchers from underrepresented backgrounds often struggle with visibility, mentorship, and confidence. So, what practical advice would you give to young scientists trying to navigate institutions that may not yet feel inclusive or accessible?
Listen, my advice is not for the young scientists. There is some advice always for young scientists, but doors open or close for young scientists by people like us, by people at every level in an institution, right? And I think one of my biggest reflections from where I have come to so far is that people took a chance on me. Lawrence Haddad met me somebody sent him my CV. He decided to, pick up the phone and give me a call. And then when he met me, he decided to offer me an unpaid internship at IFPRI in those days. That opened a door for me that was incredible, right? So, I think when we think about young researchers, one is, of course, you need to be a little bit bold as a young researcher, have your CV ready, engage on social media, connect with people. But the world is going to open in a different way for young people if we decide to do things differently. We decide to open doors, create platforms, build ways, accept somebody's connection on LinkedIn. I had a very interesting conversation with someone the other day about, whose contact connections do you accept on LinkedIn? And I said, oh, I pretty much accept everyone's, because I never know when I can be of help to somebody. Locking somebody out of my network is not helpful to that person. And it's such an easy thing to do, to accept somebody's LinkedIn connection, allow them to see your world. You don't have to answer all their messages, but you can still open a door in a different way, right? So I think for me, the next generation and what happens there depends on all of us, not just as institutional leaders, but every single person within an institution of privilege, like the CG, like CIMMYT, et cetera, has an opportunity to open doors for people. And the more we do that, the more space we create for equity and inclusion.
Thank you very much. And briefly, your work emphasized translating evidence into policy action. How can scientists communicate research in ways that are both rigorous and accessible to policymakers, communities, and marginalized groups?
Yeah, this is a very, very long conversation, but, for me, I think the most important thing is we have to first understand the policymaker. It's a myth that you write a policy brief and that's going to have some policy uptake immediately. That is not how policy decisions are made. That is not how people take evidence into policy. It's great to have the brief. It's great to have things that are digestible and easy to communicate and all of that, because you never know when you'll need it. But what's really important is if you want to have impact on policy, you need to understand your policymakers, respect their work, understand their policy cycles, understand their financial decision making, the cadence of decision making, understand how issues come onto their agenda, and sort of be ready to position, right? I mean, we don't know what's coming next. We are in a very dynamic world. But if you've done work on, like what's happening right now in terms of the Middle East crisis, we've done prior work on what happens. So when that's the discussion in a policy dialogue, you have the opportunity to offer, your work to those policy making. But there's a lot of stuff that happens in routine policy making in countries, so that people really should understand. It's amazing to me that we don't understand budget cycles. We don't understand, how financial decisions are made, how little money there is sometimes in national budgets to operate with. And then we'll end up, trying to do a lot of different things and communicating research and other stuff without really understanding, what that person's world is. So I think, understand the world of the other so you can understand where your research fits that world. But the second is also understand the constraints and respect their work. I have a great deal of respect for my policymaker friends, and many of them are friends now over the years, because, as soon as you take the time to understand their world, you realize how easy our world is as researchers. Their world is dynamic, ever-changing, daily decisions, annual decisions, shaped by politics in very sort of daily dynamic ways. And it takes a very special kind of a person to be a policymaker and to, swim in that often very upstream. They're often swimming upstream to put development issues on the agenda of politicians and national budgets. And so the more we understand their world, their work, and respect what they're doing, I think we get to see the entry points for what we can offer from our evidence and our research. And often we don't. We treat them as a black box. We're like, oh, policymakers. But you really have to understand policy processes, communities, and decision making, and then the entry points become a lot easier. But that's why IFPRI and CIMMYT should be working more together, because there's a lot of bread and butter here that connects the dots.
Okay, I don't know how much time I still have. I think I've already shot over my time. Isabel, I have two questions, but if we are running out of time, I'm happy to spare them.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead with one more question, Walter.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, briefly, yeah, looking ahead, what gives you hope? Are there emerging movements, practices, or shifts in science and development that you believe could genuinely accelerate equity and inclusion over the next decade?
Yeah, I guess I think what gives me hope is that many people have not given up hope, right? I mean, there are people who are, fighting hard for the development issues that we care about. There are people advocating at many different levels. There is a future generation, that is really speaking up and connecting on food and sort of environmental issues that I think we have to, really align with and think about, like, how do we support their work? And I have in India in the past worked a lot with advocacy groups. We don't do advocacy, but they use our data and our evidence in advocacy campaigns. And so, so I think, again, it's about knowing the rights and advocacy communities, knowing media, thinking about how to, position things looking forward. I'm also, the other thing that gives me quite a bit of optimism is, I think there's a sort of new generations of philanthropists, many of whom are also women. There are not just female billionaire philanthropists, but also, sort of multimillionaires and others who are women who understand the, lives of other women in very different ways. And so I have a lot of hope when I see people who've been previously marginalized, in society now suddenly also carrying the power of their purse, and bringing that to bear on issues that affect, both women and youth around the world. So I think we have, new generations of people that can really make change. Our challenge as some of the older people in the room is to think about, how we nurture and engage with that talent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Menon. And back to Isabel.
Yeah, thank you, Walter Chivasa, for having this very interesting conversation with Purnima Menon. For closing, Purnima, would you like to share with us some words of wisdom for the audience to take away?
I don't know, I would just say pay attention. Pay attention, lift our heads up from our research, pay attention to the world outside. When you go on field visits to see the farms, also try to understand the lives of people, also look at, the food that's in markets. There's a tremendous role we're all playing here in the CG, and a lot of what we do ends up hopefully as more money in people's pockets in terms of, the poor, but also better food on people's plates. And so, I think every single one of us actually works on nutrition through the commodities we work on, through, the supporting people in making change. So that's one. And then the second is, I would really say open doors, open doors, open doors for other people. Like, we should be in the business of opening doors, not closing doors. Every single one of us can open a door for somebody that could be really transformative for that person's life, and that person's career. And we have a great opportunity as global research organizations to create a better world for science and inclusion. So let's open as many more doors as we can. That's what I would say. Thank you. Pay attention and open doors.
Yeah, thank you so much. So on behalf of Dr. Brian Govers, Director General of CIMMYT, we thank Dr. Purnima for having presenting this very stimulating conversation today, presentation. And also we thank Dr. Chivasa for having this very, very interesting conversation. So we are really inspired. And we would like to take this moment to express our deep gratitude to all the audience and all the catalyst of change speakers that participated during these last 2 years in the edition of this seminar series that is concluding today. Thank you, Dr. Menon, for being part of this series. Stay tuned. CIMMYT will announce a new version of Catalyst of Change very soon. So have a great day and have a very nice evening. Thank you so much.
And thank you to you for conducing 2 years of Catalyst of Change, and thanks to the entire team for being so constant in what has resulted to be a unique series. I get many comments on LinkedIn, WhatsApp about the Catalyst of Change. So that's only possible thanks to the vibrant team in communication, in events, in those that have brought speakers to Catalyst of Change, all of you working behind the scenes. Thanks a lot. And up to the next revamped series coming soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Bram. And thank you, Isabella and team.